And so like there's a continuity that I love of Elrond, and not just him, but his family between elves and men, and there's this notion, you see it, for example, in the council, this kind of like all inclusiveness of the dwarves and the hobbits. Like this all like we're just all at the table, guys. Like, and so we're all children of art.
Welcome to The Plunge with Derek Holzer. A belated Happy New Year's to you all. We took a little hiatus during the last fortnight of December, and I hope that you all were able to enjoy the holiday season with family and friends and those you love. Now, we continue with Tolkien's greatest characters. Today's episode featuring Chris Skaggs and I discussing Elrond. I know you're going to enjoy it. This series will have just a few more episodes, and then we shift into a new series, Animals in Literature. We've got a lot in store for you in 2026 here at The Plunge. Thank you for your support, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Without further ado, Chris Skaggs and Elrond. Chris, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'm so glad you could join us. You and I had the opportunity to meet randomly at a convention in Michigan this past summer of 25. And you're a big LOTR fan?
Big time.
Awesome. Well, before we get into Tolkien and your character, I know that you're in the gaming industry. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey, what you're up to, and how you got there?
Yeah, sure. So I wound up, I think like a lot of people, I grew up playing games. So I remember it must have just been in grade school when the big birthday present was the Atari 2600, and you're playing Pong and tanks or whatever else. And so growing up like that was a big deal, and going through early consoles from the Atari to the Intellivision to the Nintendo. So these were all like big events as I'm growing up. And then by the time I was ready to go to college, I decided like this was probably the field I wanted to get into. And I remember seeing the first time on a TV commercial, there was like a flying logo in space or something. I'm like, that's fantastic. Computer generated images, and Tron was out. And somehow this all kind of mashed together. And I decided I wanted to be a computer animator. That was going to be my goal, my mission in life. And then my first day in this case, it was just junior college. You're getting ready for early stuff. And you're just getting to meet random people at the lunch table, and hi, how you doing, what are you into? And the guy tells me his story. I can't remember what he was studying, but it sounded interesting enough. And he asked me, and I said, well, I'm getting into computer animation. And he says, that's probably the most boring, tedious job I can imagine. Oh, well, I gotta go. And he leaves. And I remember at that point realizing I had no idea what I was getting into. I'd never done any research. I was just excited about the idea, and literally like stole my dream for like 20 years. So like I found myself floundering after, like, oh my gosh, I can't get in this stupid field. It'll be tedious and boring, like the guy said. Not that I checked out what he said. I just apparently took his word for it. And after that, kind of, I wound up in the Navy, and I sold shoes at a sporting goods store, just kind of like figuring out like what are you going to do with your life. And it was many years later that I had a web design company, and all of a sudden it felt like, if you'll allow, like, I felt like God told me to make video games. And so Soma Games was started, for lack of a better word, on kind of a supernatural hunch, I guess. And that was back in 2005. We never looked back after that. And so I've been in games ever since. And so like, yeah, that's 20 years now. And I've seen so much change in the field, so much growth, so much excitement. It's gone from at the time, I think like the Xbox, I don't know, maybe the 360 was out. I'm trying to figure pretty early. And so much between like mobile and PlayStation and all the stuff that's happened. And I've had a chance to be a witness to that, to participate in all of it. And I have loved it. It's been such a great field, especially as the industry has gone from a craft to an art form. Storytelling has gone from, a couple of little character points like Zelda needs
Yeah,
your help, right? Whatever.
almost an afterthought, right?
Yeah. To now you've got things like Baldur's Gate. What did they say? Like 300 hours of dialogue or something like that. It's enormous. So I love the storytelling. I've been saying here for a couple of years, like, gaming is going to be the Hollywood of the next century in so far as like its influence, its impact on the culture, its economics. It's just enormous. So I'm excited to be here.
That's really cool. My memory early on was the Atari 5200
There you go.
and playing every morning, waking up early before school to play Montezuma's Revenge.
Do I remember that game?
So it's like a Pitfall knockoff, I guess. But yeah, those were the days. And now Soma Games, do you develop games? Do you assist others? What is your lane in the broader ecosystem?
Yeah, so we do both. So over the years, so like I said, about 20 years, we've built about 300 different apps and games for different people. Most of those are for outside clients. And to be fair, like a lot of them are little tiny things too, right? So it's checkers and it's reversey and stuff like that. But then we've also built some really big ones, and we have our own brand as well. So Soma Games as a brand, I think we've published 10, maybe 12 games. Work for hire has been all the rest of that. And we've had a chance to work with some of the coolest names in the world, right? So it's Intel, it's MGM, it's Stargate, it's Star Wars, it's like fun IPs. It's just awesome.
Wow. That's really cool. I'd love to take a second on your concept of gaming being sort of the story lore, as you say, I think the Hollywood of the next century.
Yeah,
Could you articulate a little bit about what's driving that with respect to perhaps human psychology, even spirituality, and why is gaming the medium that has taken such hold and you think continues to project out into the future with
sure.
such a strong way?
So one thing I'd say is no matter what, story is the king of the whole thing, right? So the fact that it's a game isn't really the point, because stories are the same bread and butter that have always been from oral tradition. So that part hasn't changed at all. I think what has made gaming kind of for this so uniquely in the way in its distribution is really just a technological quirk. The fact that I can distribute my game to literally like 5,000 mobile devices with the push of a button, and not only the reach but also the cost. Like there's a zero cost of goods sold. Those that combination of distribution and economics mean that you can get that out to so many people so quickly, and there's nothing remotely like that. And so that means that it drives the economic challenge, it drives the attribution, and it means that you can find an audience, no matter how quirky or niche your story is. There's people there who want it, and the fact that I can find them, that the algorithm will find them, there's nothing like that. The other really unique thing about gaming is the fact that, and this is again a technological quirk, I can change my game in response to how the public perceives it in real time. So if there's a typo, in a book, like too bad it's printed, right? If you shot that film wrong in a movie, like too bad it's out there. Now they may re-release it, but that's a huge effort. Where gaming, I'd be like, oh, I just fix that and push it, and now everyone has it. So not only does that fix errors, which is great, but I can also actually change the story. So for whatever reason, if I can tune my story to my audience to get it just right over a period of iteration, and that's remarkably powerful for a creative person. Some would argue like that's a bad thing, right? So like what if Tolkien kept tweaking Lord of the Rings? Like would we lose something? Probably. So I don't think it's better. I think it's unique, and when we embrace that as a strength, it changes how we make games.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I appreciate that. Can I ask if you're immersed in a game world right now with your background?
Yeah, so the game that we released most recently for Soma is called The Reluctant Redemption of Verity Lux, and it's one of our own stories, and it is a kind of a steampunk film noir kind of a mashup, and it's actually the roughly speaking, it's the story of Noah's Ark, but in space. So we've got this kind of like world where we're trying to take everything that we see in Genesis 6, but now put it in Blade Runner and put it all together, including like, and then with like demons and angels and stuff. So we've put, and this is like my favorite part. I love the world building. I love the background and the stories and the history. So we've been working on that property from the IP perspective for about 2 years. And so I'm knee deep in that. And so very much, and so right now that game is on Steam, and we're pretty close to getting it ready on mobile, which is mostly a technical challenge. But yeah, I'm immersed in that. So it's my own thing.
That's really cool. I'm curious, just since you mentioned Genesis 6, is there any mention, reference, or manifestation of the Nephilim
Of
in?
course, that's part of the
Good,
fun.
good. Well, we'll have to have a separate conversation on that one. That's really neat. One more question about Soma Games. What would be, is there a genre that most of your games are, or is it pretty wide open in terms of the ones you've personally, created,
Yeah,
your
so
IP?
those of probably story rich is the big genre for everything. Like everything we've done really revolves around kind of the storytelling and the music. And so whether that's Redwall, which is a huge, we worked with the Redwall IP for many years, which was a gigantic honor. Which of course, just the ability to tell a new story in that world was fantastic. We had to really soak ourselves in that IP for half of a decade. Um, and so, yeah, so story games. But then as far as gameplay genre, we got interactive fiction, which is kind of barely a game, to like full 3D puzzle adventure, stuff in between.
That's really neat. Well, the subject of our conversation today has now, advanced into Hollywood, and I'm not a gamer, but I imagine there are definitely Lord of the Ring derivative games or Hobbit games out there. Um, how did you first encounter Tolkien?
Probably actually about the same time I got my Atari 2600, right? It was something where I remember my first thing would have been even younger, where I got this little record for my toy record player, and a book like from the Rankin Bass animated Hobbit. And I knew every line, I knew every song, like I just studied that thing, and probably because I had 2 records, right? But but I loved it. Uh, I do remember when Ralph Bakshi had the animated Fellowship of the Ring, and I thought it was far inferior. I was like, "That animation stinks," but it kind of woke me up to the book, and I felt like now I'm old enough to read Fellowship of the Ring, and the thing that really stuck with me, and this was especially true regarding, the Shire and that area, was feeling this weird sense of homesickness for a place that, of course, didn't exist and I'd never been. And it took me, it was years and years later reading C.S. Lewis talk about this longing that we can have for the eternal, and we don't know where it comes from, but that he would identify that it comes from heaven, that we were made for Eden. So I really felt that in Lord of the Rings and still do. In fact, just about a month ago, I went back and started Lord of the Rings for the first time in about a decade. Like I haven't read it in a while. And it just rings just as true, just as beautiful. So that's hard to describe, but that's really how I got tied into it.
Yeah, well, and it's an exquisite tale, obviously. Um, Now, the moment that we've all been waiting for is the character you chose, and if you could name them and tell me why.
Yeah, you bet. So I want to talk about Elrond, the half elven. Um, and there's a couple reasons why, but they're a little bit kind of hard to get to. So probably when I was reading those books, Elrond's a great character, don't get me wrong, but he wasn't the one that stands out most. However, about 5 years ago, I started a community of game developers who are also Christians. And we wound up calling that community Imladris. And it was something that just felt right at the time for probably one of the reasons is gamers are such nerds. And so like just own it, just go full nerd stuff. But I wasn't thinking about like, oh, this is my favorite character. But the name itself kind of shaped the community because this idea, you think about Elrond's council and meeting kind of everyone was there who had a stake in the fate of the world. And you've got the gardener next to the king and the wizards and the dwarves. Like everyone's there at the table, and sort of that sense of, I guess, equality and kind of that really reflected, I think, part of the ethos of the community. So, long story short, Imladris has still become it's probably the thing I'm most excited about in my career right now. It's really grown into something that's fun and motivating. It speaks very much to my desire to shape if gaming is going to be the Hollywood of tomorrow, like what can we actually do about it that's positive? So that's been like my passion for the last several years, which leads me directly to when you asked me like what character would you pick? Like, well, I guess Elrond. Like that fits like where I find myself in my story. And that led me really to do a lot more study. Like because it's a character that you have to you have to dig quite a bit deeper, right, than the obvious to learn more about him. I just think he's fascinating.
That's neat. So you would be playing the role of Elrond within your community there,
in some
assembling
weird
and
way.
gathering.
Yeah, I guess so.
I mean, I know from our brief interaction in person, it's clear that you're a dynamic person who's passionate about what you're doing, and you're gifted at encouraging others to participate and join. And so I'm curious about Imladris. What is it? And if there are any people watching that are interested in participating, what would that look like?
Sure. So I presume everyone here knows, but Imladris is the Elvish word for Rivendell. So that is um, that is really hard to spell. But if you know the spelling, Imladris.community is the website, and it started as it's just a dinner party with a couple of friends, like not frankly not unlike the Council of Elrond, which is like I see these things happening in the world, and I want to talk to some of my friends about it. We were just coming out of the COVID and people were, poking their heads out and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that gaming has crossed that tipping point where it is now inevitable that this is the ascendant medium. I know how much the church in particular did not handle the rise of Hollywood. Like we really pooped the bed in that case, mostly by pulling back. Um, and and so as a result, the church really has had very little influence when it could have. And so I like to say people today who are complaining, why doesn't Hollywood reflect the church's values? And it's not because they're especially evil. It's because we just abandoned the field. So I was like, with this first meeting, it's like, we just can't do that. So what can we do to make this, to do this differently? And one of the first things that we saw in that group was how wounded people were. Like even the people at that table, they really felt called to this industry. They felt like this was where God wanted their work to be done. But the industry largely doesn't like you if you're a Christian, so it'll give you grief about that. But also the church doesn't like you if you're in gaming. And so they found themselves in this kind of wounded middle ground, but still really committed to the field. So recognizing just that hurtness, that was really stifling, innovation, stifling participation. And literally, I just recognize this right now. Like if Elrond's known for one thing, it's healing. It's his ability to heal. And I just feel like that's one of Imladris's biggest roles is to help heal these individuals who don't know where to find themselves in the sector, to validate them like art is a valid calling in the kingdom of God, and gaming is an art form. But also the hurt kind of between the church and entertainment in general, because there's a lot of miscommunication, a lot of misunderstanding, and that's not just gamers. I think it's all of the arts. So that becomes a big part of what Imladris is about. And then connected to that was the sense of profound isolation that all these people felt. Like I remember this is one of my favorite stories. I get a letter from a guy at Activision who says, "I love what you're doing. I'm pretty sure I'm the only Christian at Activision." Now this is a company, 8,000 people, something. It's a big company. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not true, but he feels it's true. And then that same week, I got another letter. I'm the only Christian at Activision. And these guys worked at the same building, but they had no awareness of each other. And that's what we see so often is I meet guys and gals who they think they're the only believer in the audience. They're so glad to meet number two. I'm like, oh, no, no, no. Like, let me introduce you to thousands. And you see their eyes pop open. Like, I had no idea. And so just that sense of being welcomed and to something that was already there. Like you don't have to make this. You're just, the door just opens and it makes people come alive and it re-energizes their commitment in a way that I don't think anything else quite could. And I feel like that right now, that's the strongest thing. So to your question, one, if you're even tangentially are related to gaming. And I mean that really broadly. Like it doesn't matter if marketing, CEO, anything. If you're a creative of any kind, musician, artist, actor, most likely there's more work in gaming than there is in what other field, just because there's so many jobs. So like, please, like come alongside. Like we would just love to break bread with you. That's the biggest thing. On the other hand, you're seeing an awakening, I think, in folks all across media. And of course, like you're writing the books with Zach, and there's this awakening in people who are wanting to bring good quality stories, movies, songs, games, all of it, because they feel that it's a necessity. And I love that. So right now, Imladris is focused on gaming because that's just where I started, right? That was my home base. But it's really quickly becoming arts in general. And especially ones that have more of a technical aspect. So far we don't have any ballet teachers, but but somewhere in here, like it's brewing out from movies and writing and music. The more they use computers, the more they make sense in our community.
Thank you so much. Well, Imladris.community, I'll put that website in the show notes, and really appreciate you sharing that. And I think, to your point, it's remarkable how much those in the community of faith, I think uniquely American and perhaps even more uniquely evangelical of the last century, reacted to almost every technology with fear first
Yeah, yeah,
and withdrawal. And so I applaud your efforts, and I hope to do the same with respect to going boldly in love and goodness and creating. I mean,
yeah.
that's the essence of the whole point. So, yeah. And so back to Elrond. Thoughts that you might have with respect to his representation to the ancient history of Middle Earth.
Yeah, so I find Elrond's family tree fascinating, and so obviously we call him Elrond half Elven. The fact that Beren was one of his ancestors, and so he's got this human blood coming in. And before we started this conversation, I didn't know that he had a twin brother, Elros, right? And if I remember right, Elros becomes either the kind of progenitor of Numenor, or certainly amongst them. So he kind of like represents, like where that comes. But then Elrond chooses the elven side. And so like there's a continuity that I love of Elrond, and not just him, but his family, between elves and men. And there's this notion, you see it, for example, in the council, this kind of like all inclusiveness of the dwarves and the hobbits. Like this all like we're just all at the table, guys. Like, and so we're all children of Arda. This is all part of the thing. And yet, I think by the time, and this was somewhere you by the time you get to Fellowship of the Ring of the Hobbit, he seems a little bit distant, right? It's like I'm up here in Rivendell, like I'm not really involved. But I think historically, you have to see he's one of the most involved, hands-on parts of the story. I think far more than Galadriel. As far as elves go, he's out there, like he's on the battlefield. He's next to Gil-galad, like he's doing the thing. It just so happens that phase, that's not the role that he's playing. But his history I think, is this continuity between like kind of one of the earlier people that starts to see the bigger picture, including the role of men in the whole story. Um, and I find that really compelling about him, to kind of bring in some ways trying to bring this continuity and bridge building between the different races, between the different times. And he's seen it all, man. He's seen so much of this history personally, like front row. Like, no, I was there, right? I did the thing. It's fascinating.
It really
And
is. It's a beautiful portrayal of harmony across, as you describe, a diversity of beings, and the union when there is harmony amongst them, and harmony, in fact, I guess, embodied in Elrond himself. So,
agreed.
are
There
there
was some
any?
there
Oh,
was
go
something
ahead.
about his story that I found really compelling too. Is and there was an argument made on, I think it was on Deep Geek. I think it's Deep Geek is the name of the website. Um, he was pointing out that Elrond could have rightly claimed the kingship when Gil-galad died. Like he would have been in a position to say, like, yeah, I'm going to be the new king of the Sindar, I think. But he didn't, right? And so instead, he's like, I'm just going to go home. My home will be a place of refuge, but I'm not a king of anything. And I thought that was actually really a compelling moment. Like he doesn't see himself; he's not power hungry in any way. He's like, and then the guy at the same video makes the point. Tolkien doesn't call him Lord. He's always that title, that notion of aristocracy was something that even Tolkien just didn't go there with him, even though he's one of the most aristocratic, so to speak, and it's kind of in the best sense in all the books. So I found that humility really uniquely interesting in Elrond. Anyways, maybe that's a sidebar.
No, that's a great point, and in particular, it ties into my next question with respect to perhaps biblical or other figures that in your estimation, might Tolkien have been drawing on
Yeah.
to create Elrond?
I read one bit where apparently Tolkien had a girlfriend slash fiance, and he had I don't know the right title for this, but basically there was a priest who was Tolkien was his ward in some sense. So I'm not exactly sure how the relationship worked, but that this priest was like, you don't get to marry that girl until such and such a time, and he was drawing from this notion of like one being aware of this kind of role of authority, but then also the way in which he contrasts. Um, and I'm going to forget which one it was, but whoever it was who sent Beren on the suicide quest to get the Silmaril, who was like this kind of nasty, like, no, you can't marry my daughter until you do this ridiculous, which is, we've seen stories like that of kings in the past. Elrond's Elrond's requirement from Aragorn is only, hey, just be you. Like quit farting around. Like, be the person that you were meant to be. And then Arwen, and like, I'll give the blessing here. He becomes this picture of a loving father. And so, in some ways, I think what's really interesting is as a father figure, which is maybe not a name in the Bible, but this idea of like, what does it mean to be the good father? Elrond's fascinating in that way, I think. He raises Aragorn, but that was only the most recent of a chain of Northern Dunedain that he had raised in Rivendell. The way that he treats Arwen as a father, I think the way that he treats almost everyone in the story is he's offering that fatherly advice. He's not telling anyone what to do. Like, even when it comes down to like, he's not going to tell Frodo to do a thing. He's like, this is what I think. I think this task is fallen to you, but it's your call, man. He does the same thing to all of the people in the fellowship. It's like, I'm not going to lay any burden on you or command. You have to go on your own free will. And I think that's a cool bit. He really treats them as adults. He treats them as willing, free agents. And that feels like the good father. We hear this from God, the Father, in that sense. And I'm trying to remember the name of the God figure it always escapes me, but we don't have any sort of picture of that character like impersonated, right? But I think that Elrond maybe becomes the closest from that fatherly sense. Like, this is the father character to all these guys. And so you see that in the prodigal son. You see that kind of in both pictures of fathers in the Bible, who some of them do really well, some of them really don't. Something I appreciate from The Chosen is the way that they portray Joseph, of being this good father, even to God himself. It's just such a wild role to play. But I love that. And then what he's offering is wisdom. He's offering advice, and those are the characteristics I think make the most sense in his case.
Yeah, that I really appreciate you drawing on the parallel with perhaps the prodigal son. Not necessarily a one for one overlay, but that he does not impose his will on anyone and allows characters to choose, as you point out, to Frodo, this is what I think, but you will have to decide.
Yeah. And you have
So
this
beautiful.
moment, which we see, I think, so well depicted in the movies, is Elrond is there with Isildur at the gates, the cracks of doom. You throw the ring away. Now's a great time. And you're like, and when Isildur says no, like, Elrond could have just pushed him, right? Like, hey, this is for the greater good, man. I'm sorry. But the fact that he has to respect that free will, even of Isildur, even in his folly, it says a lot.
Yeah. Well, and as you pointed out earlier, and in this example just now, that Elrond is more than perhaps most in the heat of things,
Yeah.
out there in the action. And I'm curious. I mean, I suspect that is because he has the life of man as part of who he is. But I also would love for you to comment on how that dual nature in one is perhaps, well, maybe not uh, hyper, not the most critical element, but certainly a significant component of how the story itself advances.
Yeah. I'd like to, like, so you contrast what does Lorien look like compared to Rivendell. And as beautiful as Lorien is, it is deeply shielded. It's hidden. It's not welcoming. Like the idea that the borders are so well guarded, no one has been like the guys at Gondor, like no one's been there in hundreds of years. Like so, it's become mysterious and weird. Um, and some of that is just the way that I think Celeborn and Galadriel kind of see their space. I think part of it is the role of Nenya, of her ring, and just kind of this enclosing of it. And in some way, I think in a good sense, that makes it kind of heavenly, which is like would you say otherworldly? Where the last homely house is so much in this world, it is always open doors. Like anyone comes and everyone feels welcome. Like there's a really interesting contrast. They're both good, but I think if you were to take kind of the heaven and earth thing, like Imladris is heaven or is earthly, and I'm sorry, Lorien is heavenly, and where they overlap is a little bit different ways of styling. So like Galadriel also, war of the rings of power notwithstanding, Galadriel seems to be largely aloof from the events of history. Where, like you said, Elrond is just in it. He's in it the whole time. And I think just that approach to the whole change of Middle Earth, it says a lot about who he is, that he cares about. He cares about Middle Earth specifically. He cares about humans. He cares about, and he's going to use his available power to do something about it without necessarily sending an army.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's such a place of it's like an oasis almost.
Yeah.
The hospitality, the again, I keep being drawn back to the equality that is manifest in the way that everyone is treated in their interactions there. Um, Now, obviously, Elrond is fantastic. Are there any aspects of his nature or character that you would characterize as a negative or perhaps even a vice?
Vice, I probably wouldn't go to Vice, but I would say there's a piece of Elrond that I think he becomes distant. And especially as we get into the end of the Third Age, like I think that, and he seems to recognize this, like just him and the way that he lives, like maybe that made sense in the Second Age, but like somewhere like he sees it coming to an end. And so I think you see this in his language. It feels archaic. I think that he can come off as maybe condescending. And I think that Tolkien didn't mean it, that he was actually condescending, but there's a mismatch between kind of the old ways and the current ways. And so that as the world is evolving and changing, Elrond is timeless insofar as like he's not changing, but the world has changed around him. And so in that regard, I think that he feels mismatched. And in a way, he like I would say like when you see Galadriel leave at the Grey Havens, there's a sense, at least in my mind, that she never really belonged here. Like in the end, she was kind of stalling. Um, but Elrond, I felt is more like there's the notion of like just the kind of the old guard passing away, and it was time for this. And that's sad in a different way. So so in that regard, like he becomes, I think, and that might have been the difference between Elrond in the Second Age and Elrond in the Third Age, is maybe also like the kinds of things that made sense, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. They're just not the same anymore. So I appreciate his willingness to step aside. Uh, yeah, but I'm trying to think like, and maybe I'd be curious how you see it. Like, do you see vices in Elrond?
No, I wouldn't say vices. A little flair for the dramatic there with my language, but I, I, I th- I'm curious. The thing that is striking me right now as you depict this is the actual effect of immortality in a world that is not, I
Yeah,
suppose,
yeah,
right? Like, there's something to that juxtaposition that makes it very challenging to portray, and maybe it is accurate, but if you're going to be immortal, uh, you need a pretty deep reservoir of hope,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's something I discovered when I was researching this is I'd never realized that Arwen is Galadriel's granddaughter. And so and so when I started to see this is family tree, and I mentioned like it was fascinating to watch his tree come through Beren, so the half elven, but then you come from Galadriel and Celeborn, who are purely elves, and yet it comes back to Arwen choosing humanity. And so again, this idea of the ascendant role of humans in this age. I find fascinating to watch that go through these two lines. And it probably speaks to what you said. And I think this is depicted pretty well in the movies is Elrond's, I don't know the right word, sorrow, I guess, of knowing that his daughter's going to die. And that she did it like that it was a choice, but that how do you give someone grief? Like you're choosing this because of love. Like that's a pretty good motive.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that is a perfect segue to what I next wanted to discuss, and that is the relationship that Elrond has with Arwen and his relationship with Aragorn. If you'll just talk about them as much or as little as you like.
Sure. So as far as like what I see here is you've got um, Elrond. And again, I'm pretty sure this is how this works. So that he married Celeborn and Galadriel's daughter. I think her name is Celeborn, something like that. She winds up captured, tortured, loses all of her hope for the world, and winds up going to the Grey Havens, leaving him here in the world. So he's already lost someone to hopelessness. And so this was his bride, but their daughter and two sons, they're here in the world, and so here's kind of the family dynamic: is he's a single dad, who's already suffered this loss. And and then you have this history, of course, Beren and Luthien coming back to truth, as Aragorn, who is the kind of the current descendant of Isildur and Elendil, who's being raised in the household, right? So from human raised in the house of immortals. So there's all the training, there's all the, kingcraft, there's all of that going on. But somewhere in there, Arwen and Aragorn meet eyes, and there's a romance that has to happen here. And so this has to happen. It just sort of, you fill in the gaps, is this would have presumably been the, I don't know, 10th, 20th Dunedain he's raised under his tutelage. I don't know how long that was, but it's not like it's the first one. And so this is different. This idea that something here is different. And given that Elrond has the gift of foresight, he probably also at some sense realizes we're coming to the end. We're coming to the end of this age. The timing is looking like whatever the shape this takes, little by little, he's probably seeing it. And I think that it would be very Tolkien-esque to recognize sort of the echo of Beren and Luthien in Arwen. Like I think he's going to see that, and not just like, oh, that's coincidence, but rather, oh, this is living prophecy. Like this is the way that the world is supposed to work. I don't think in the books he dissuades Arwen like he does in the movies. I don't think that happens. I think it was a good part in the movies, and maybe a realistic scene that makes sense, but I don't remember that that's in the books at all. Um, so so you've got, I think, this idea of, and then he makes a point also to send his sons to Aragorn in Rohan. So again, not only is Elrond willing to put his own life at the hazard, but he believes it to his family, like this is the right thing, this is a just thing. So again, it's not him specifically at Gondor, but it's his family. He believes it. And I think he's quite literally the kingmaker, sending this banner with them to proclaim before the dead here at the Pass of the Dead. So I see all of this family dynamic where he's leaning into the rise of men, the rise of Gondor, the kind of role that the elves are diminishing. We've had our time where it's time to go back. And you know what? I just started talking and I literally lost track of the question you asked. I'm
No, that
having
was
fun
great.
here.
It was great. Thank you. I was asking just with respect to the relationship that Elrond had with Arwen and Aragorn, and I think that you touched on it very well. Was there anything else that you wanted to point out or draw out from that?
Probably only that this is where I feel like the books read different than the movie, in that the sense I get from the books is like, yes, Elrond basically insists that Aragorn lives to his full nature as opposed to being in exile, but not in a kind of mean, belligerent father type, but to be like my daughter is worthy of you being yourself, right? Like, and so like, don't be less than that. She deserves it, but so does he, right? And so he's not being a jerk about it. And I really like that, especially in contrast to the way that Tolkien talks about this priest, and the way that we see in the Baron story. Is it Fingal? Who sends Baron on that quest? I can't
Yeah,
remember the first one.
Thingol. I believe it's Thingol. Um, I've got a question that is a little bit of a divergence, but more of a like a meta question with respect to Tolkien being British, the monarchy, the portrayal, the persistent portrayal of kings and queens and princes and princesses, and their enduring appeal as both in history and culture, but also in your work in world building and games. What do you suppose is uh, under the surface of that timeless appeal to humans in an age in which, obviously, for Americans, right, it was all about rebelling against the king. So,
Yeah,
and yet it holds great power in the psyche, I think, universally. I'd
yeah,
love for you to speak to that.
that's a good question. Um, I think that you point to it is just the nature of the American thing to be like literally children of rebellion, right? So you've got, and I used to think about myself like I am think like rebelling, a sinner before God. I am B, a Protestant, like literally a protester. I am C, I'm a Scot. All we ever do is rebel. And I'm D, an American. Like I like rebellion is all I do. So like this is so deep in my blood. And yet, and I can't remember the first time I read this, the idea that we must fully understand Christ as a benevolent dictator. Like like no one's voting, right? All the things that are right or wrong. It's not a democracy. It's not a represent. I don't, to my knowledge, there's no notion in which there's a parliament, right, that we get to decide. Um, and so I do think that the idea of hierarchy is quite cooked in to the universal. Like that's the way that the universe works, and that's not just humans. That's animals, and it's the natural order. Like hierarchy is a thing, and so we want there to be a good king. We want there to be that exists. We've just come to doubt it. I think that we've come. So many of us have grown up under bad kings and queens, and it's not that we don't like power; it's that we distrust it because we have reason to distrust it. So I think that Tolkien is drawing on, and you see this throughout the different characters. There are good kings and bad kings. There's ones who are suffering and who are restored. There's ones who have been good all along. There's ones who never had a chance. And so you see this in like Faramir and Boromir. There's this notion that one was too human, right? Too tempted by the draw of power. And Faramir, they talk about him being kind of like the Numenorians reborn, like it's in him, sort of the best of it, right? Um, and I think this idea of like Tolkien doesn't seem to shy away from there are absolutely bad, inappropriate, wicked uses of power and authority. Denethor is a great example, but he's not the only one. Saruman, I think, is probably the biggest one of where authority was given, corrupted, and then taken away. I think one of my favorite scenes is watching Gandalf confront him at Orthanc and removing his authority through the breaking of his staff. Like this is what you were supposed to be, or rather, I'm what you were supposed to be, but you lost it. So I think this notion of authority and power is so cooked into the human experience. But I'll tell you, this is actually one of the things we talk about a lot at our conferences is um, 1 Corinthians 6 has this idea. It says like, don't you know that the saints will judge the world? Don't you know that we're going to judge angels? And I mean, you talk to people, it's like, did you know that? Like, I had no friggin' idea. I don't even like that idea. Um, and and so, how is it that the Bible is full of hierarchy? That well done, good and faithful servant. Here's 10 cities to rule. Like, let's pass on the question from like, if we're all there, who am I ruling? But let's skip that for the moment. But like, where do we in the church teach anyone to bear authority well? Do we teach to be a good king and a queen? Instead, I think that our tendency is to recoil from power, and this I think speaks to what we did in Hollywood is we just didn't want the responsibility, and so we run away. But now we just leave the field, right? And so who else is there? So Tolkien's, I think, like good kings, bad kings, past kings, future kings, It is so key to, I think, the way that that we feel the universe, but we don't know what to do with our bad experience, with our woundedness. Elrond, I think, is just one example of one possible path. Like, I don't want to say like I'm judgy about Galadriel. It's just a different way to lead. Elrond picked a pretty hands-on, uh, in some ways, like I'm up there. I'm going to put my own self at risk, but also but I respect all the other people. That's just one way to be a good king. But I don't think anyone ever thinks he's a bad one.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And drawing from that, the sort of oh, I don't know, very beautiful moment, at least portrayed in the films. Speaking of kings, and when Aragorn tells the hobbits at the end, you kneel before no man.
Yeah,
And so I'd love to segue into Elrond's relationship with Bilbo and Frodo and your thoughts with respect to any aspect of that, but in particular, the continuing reminder to the reader or the viewer that the hobbits may be small, but they are not insignificant.
yeah, yeah. Probably the thing that I look at the most, and this is true both Elrond and Galadriel. In fact, probably lots of people make this comment. There's this idea that something, right, the universe selected Bilbo find the ring. It's selected. So like Gandalf has this thing, the ring wanted to be found, but something else wanted to be found by Bilbo. And they're like, he doesn't say God, but that's the implication, right? And not only do they recognize that, they deeply respect it. Like, if this is the will of God, like, oh, we got to lean into that. Like, we can't take that away. I can't circumvent that. And so you see Bilbo and Frodo honored as the ring bearers. Like, this was this enormous gift, right? Um, and by that I mean the gift of their respect, of their honor, of the deal. Like we would not think to overrule that, or be like, okay, thanks. Now that you've brought it to Rivendell, like your time is done. Have a pasty and go back home. Like they don't do that. There's this idea like the universe chose you, and I think the ability to like lay down power in that regard. Any one of those people at that council, Sam notwithstanding, could have just taken it from Frodo, and he'd have been said thank you, right? And yet they didn't. And that includes Boromir, by the way. Like he didn't pick, he tries later, but at least at the moment, that respect, I think, that they show to the hobbits is profound. And it seems to me to rise from their recognition that God had chosen them. Like that's how, at least how I look at it. And the lines that both Gandalf and Galadriel and Elrond, they all talk about this, like, wow, this is interesting. And I think, but those three in particular, having that they've got the three rings, the three elvish rings, that they had a really very personal and important stake in this thing, including to the destruction of their own power, right? To the destruction of the rings, the three elven rings, that they lose their potency. So like that laying down of power feels super Christ-like. That feels super of like emptying themselves of like, I've got a role to play, but I'm not going to cling to it, right? I'm not going to force it beyond what it's supposed to be. And I love that. I remember just being really profoundly aware of this. And I probably saw it way more in the movies than I did it like I didn't notice it as much in the book. But in the movies, this notion of how is it that no one in that room is just going to take the ring? It's just wild to me.
Mhm.
And you see that echoed in that there's that scene where where Aragorn kind of like closes the ring around Frodo's hand at Amon, anyways, at the seeing platform. It's so cool. It's like this is not how it works, and like immediately that's contrasted to Boromir's trying to take it. It's just so good. So
It really is.
maybe what I see in them more than anything else is that awareness of the bigger picture that I think is hidden from everyone else, or at least most everybody else.
Yeah, yeah. I boy, you got my mind going on what does that portrayal inspire me to do in my relationships with others
Mm.
and in the way that I respect and, yeah, just respect all people, as I make my way in the world.
There's, I think, an underdeveloped skill that I wish I wish I was better at it, but I think we should teach it. Is if we believe that God works on my life in whatever way that means to you, like maybe you're all Pentecostal and He speaks to you, maybe you're not so much that way, but whatever way God works in your life. we have to also recognize that God works in other people's lives and train ourselves to see that and respect it, right? So like if God told you this, like I'm not going to gainsay that. Boy, that's hard. And especially if like I think God's working in my life in a different way, right?
Right, right. We we're awfully good at projecting our own experience onto
Yeah.
everyone else's, right?
Yeah.
Um, I so I want to come back just a couple of final things. Really, we've already almost hit an hour here. It's been a blast, Chris. I'm really glad that we've crossed paths and hope to continue to do so. Um, I want to park for a second on the choice when, that Elrond chooses immortality and the consequences of that, not just for the story and not just for the other characters, but for himself. Um, are there any thoughts you might have on that and any thoughts you might have on the gift of mortality?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, we probably there's probably um, other works that have dwelled on this question more. I think probably the some of the best writing is actually from Anne Rice in the vampire books. You know, kind of her reflections on how vampires are immortal and just what a misery it is. The way that she describes it's like such a misery, and it's not. I think evident that that's because they're vampires, right? It's not about the blood. It's not about that. It's about the immortality. Um, and she really talks a lot about this is no gift if I lose my choice. It's no gift if it means that my life sort of loses a sense of meaning because there's no real consequence. Um, and I can't remember where I read this, but they were talking about the kind of the awakenings of the dwarves and the elves and the humans, and and at least some of the elves seeing the humans' mortality as a thing that they envy, that they were like, "Oh, that would be so much better." And thinking about that is just a wild thing because and then it also talks about the Numenorians. One of their great falls was that they were not content with mortality; they wanted immortality, and that corrupted them, at least partly. I was part of the story, and it reminds me of this thing about Christ, and if you can't lay down your life, you're going to lose it. That the one who will lose their life will gain it. There's this paradox, I think, to mortality that if the elves don't have that choice, and I guess in some ways they do, because at least in Tolkien, like they can still die, right? There's still violence and this kind of stuff, so they can die. They can give their life for something better, but they don't just age. And so you could play it safe, right? You could play it safe forever. Um, I can't say that I have any particular thoughts on what it meant for Elrond to choose us when his brother chooses humanity. Um, I can't help but wonder: was there some conversation in there that is almost like you go one way, I'll go the other, and we'll meet in the middle? I don't know, but I could imagine something like that.
Yeah.
Um, and then I don't mind saying also, like I've always imagined the angels as being that they never procreate. I don't know if there's no reason for me to believe one way or the other, but that's in my mind. And yet I always struggle with this. Like, so elves they're having kids. Like, how does this work exactly? So I'm fascinated by that, by just the mechanics of it. I like having that opportunity where you're not born with it. Uh, you're not born mortal or immortal. Like you have this opportunity to choose. That would be a heck of a choice.
Right.
And I wonder if what Elrond was feeling is like, I could be more useful. I could be more helpful. Like I could do more good the longer I can be here. And then you wonder by the end of the third age, did he feel like he had done that? So
Yeah. 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 Well, I can speak for myself. I think as a younger man, I would quickly and impulsively choose immortality. And as time passes, I'm more and more inclined to think mortality's okay.
that's the truth, right?
Right. Oh, man. Thank you, Chris. My last question, we're already here, is just what, in your estimation, makes Elrond so phenomenal, and what are some attributes or characteristics that can inspire us to live better in the world as we go forth from here?
Yeah. So I will put that in the context of why I chose him in the first place, which is to say, I find myself at a stage in my life where you're a little bit older, got a little bit more authority under your belt, and you realize this is really hard. You talk about being a young man where everything seems possible, nothing you do is ever wrong. You don't have your mistakes behind you and, the things that didn't go according to plan. But as you start to have a little bit of authority, it's really difficult. And Elrond is he's just a guide. He's an example of how that can be done so well. And I need that. I need that as a guide. And like I said, I think that he's not the first character I would pick out of the lineup to be like, oh, I really love that guy. But as I thought more about, since you and I met and had a chance to think about it, he's just a brilliant character. Um, his ability to bring wisdom, I think, is the kind of thing that only an old soul appreciates, right? Like, as a younger person, it's like, I just need the data, man. Wisdom is such a more subtle gift. I think that the idea that Vilya, so his ring, I think is seen as the most powerful of the three rings, and yet you would never know it. So whatever Elrond is doing with Vilya, like, we just don't know, and you're left with, what could he have done? What didn't he do? And the fact that that question is unanswered, I think, speaks so much to this question of humility and grace and long suffering. So I'm back to this question of, like, I see Elrond as such a good father. Um, that I want to be that. I think that we know so few of those in our lives that there just needs to be more. And if he can be a guide to me, if he can be a guide to others of, what does it look like to lead well? What does it look like to father well? We need those examples. And certainly I do. Certainly I
Yeah.
find myself in that space. Yeah.
Oh, man, thank you so much, Chris. It's beautiful and a perfect ending as we, at least you and I, attempt to be good fathers in whatever domain we're operating and leading others in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. This is brilliant. I'm so glad I got invited. Thank you.
Today's episode of The Plunge is sponsored by Elrond's speech to his daughter Arwen in the Peter Jackson adaptation of Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. Here we go. If Aragorn survives this war, you will still be parted. If Sauron is defeated and Aragorn made king and all that you hope for comes true, you will still have to taste the bitterness of mortality. Whether by the sword or the slow decay of time, Aragorn will die. And there will be no comfort for you, no comfort to ease the pain of his passing. He will come to death, an image of the splendor of the kings of men in glory undimmed before the breaking of the world. But you, my daughter, you will linger on in darkness and in doubt. As nightfall in winter that comes without a star, here you will dwell, bound to your grief under the fading trees, until all the world has changed and the long years of your life are utterly spent. Arwen, there is nothing for you here, only death. Thank you, Elrond, great king, loving father, for revealing how difficult it is and yet how timeless it is when two star-crossed lovers cannot be kept apart. Thank you for sponsoring today's episode of The Plunge.